So Matt Walsh's talking points, right? So one of the things that he says is, well, the stats say 50%, but you're an individual. You can beat those odds because you're an individual. So he's trying to separate you from the stats, saying that you don't have to participate in those stats. You don't have to be a participant in those failures if you choose not to be. That's a fair statement. Only the problem with that, though, is that you're only responsible for yourself and what you can control. You're not able to control her. You're not able to control her decisions. You're not able to control the decisions that she makes as a consequence of her past. For example, a woman that's shared her body with a number of guys is a far worse long-term relationship, use the word partner, wife, versus one that's a virgin. One that's a virgin, the chances of her being unhappy, experiencing displeasure, wanting to leave the marriage is very, very small. I think it's less than like 30%. Whereas if she shared her body with something like 3 or 4 guys plus, the number goes up to like over 60%, 70%, right? And it just keeps getting worse. And the truth of the matter is, I think that most guys acknowledge today that women have been promiscuous with impunity. Toxic feminists have been telling women for decades now, not for years, but for decades, and several decades back to back, you go, girl. If a man can do it, you can do it too. Go out there, have fun, right? And that in reality just makes it, I mean, like, where are these virgin women that these guys are supposed to find that also subscribe to religious values wholeheartedly, that would make vows? So he said a few things like, state in principle, no divorce from the offset. So you and your future wife are to sit down and to state in principle, no matter how bad things get, we're not going to get divorced. Isn't that the vows that you take when you go before the church in your family and you say, in sickness and health and richer and poorer and da-da-da-da and all that sort of stuff, we're not going to end this? The church legitimately says, when you go before the priest or whoever it is that performs the ceremony, and I know this because I had a ceremonial wedding when I did mine, there is no divorce. They overtly, explicitly state it very loudly and clearly, you're never to get divorced, right? Well, how did that work out, right? It just doesn't go that way. They can say what they want, for the betterment of their, their institution, but stating in principle, there's going to be no divorce from the from the onset. You're going to resolve all the, well, what if you sit down and try to resolve all the issues with your wife? What if she's just not cooperating? What if she's bitchy and demanding and controlling and, just a difficult individual in general? How are you going to hash out these differences? You're just not. Shared faith, was another one he said. Well, if you both subscribe to what the faith says, you'll never untie the knot. And that's simply not true. I've been doing private phone consults with guys for years now, thousands upon thousands of conversations I've had. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with religious men and women. When they got together, they subscribed to a faith, a shared faith that they both agreed on wholeheartedly, hook, line, and sinker. But what they don't tell you is that women always reserve the right to change their mind at any given time later on down the road. It just happens. Men change, women change. It happens. It just is, it's a reality of the world. So whatever you agree on today may not be something that you necessarily agree on in 7 years' time, in 12 years' time, whatever it happens to be. You may not necessarily agree on those things in the future. And if you get bored as a woman, and we know that women get bored faster in long-term relationships than men do. For men, their interest in the woman sort of declines slowly over time, whereas with women, it just drops off like a hockey stick. These are not my words. This is Esther Perel. She's written a ton of books on this. She's covered it in TED Talks. She's covered it in her podcast. I've met her in person. We've had conversations. Like, this is how it works. This is how it generally goes for most relationships. That's just how it is. So saying that you share a faith today is going to be the end all be all is absurd. It's, it's a nice thing to state. It's noble. Sure. Is it virtuous? Of course. But people change their minds, and women change their minds, and you can't control how a woman thinks. The only parts of the world that you can, control is yourself. Are the things you can do? Yeah, we'll talk about things that you can do that would contribute to a long-standing marriage, perhaps, if we can put it that way. Shared values was the other one they said. If you have shared values, that's going to minimize the risk. Okay. You know, I'll I'll vividly recount this call that I had with a guy, and this isn't the only call that I had. I've had a number of these calls, with guys. Got married to her in the church. She was whatever, Mormon from a family of 18. Everybody's, subscribed to this religion sort of thing, big family, big church thing, big community sort of thing. And she has the 2.1 kids. We buy the house. 7 years later, the kids are all in school. She decides to go to work, gets into HR, in some woke company, that starts talking about things like inclusivity and different kind of rainbows and flags and pronouns and voting habits. And now we're starting to talk about things like oppression. Like, it doesn't matter what you believe today. If you surround yourself or you put yourself in an environment where things go woke and weird and pollute the belief system that you subscribe to, the faith, things will change. This is not new. There's a bit that Eddie Murphy did. I think it was either Raw or Delirious. I can't remember. I'm actually talking about the bit in my second book as I'm writing it. But I have to go down and actually get the actual name, but I'm pretty sure it's Raw. But he talks about picking up, he's like, women here suck. This is in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. We're in 2023 right now. We're talking almost 4 freaking decades. We're talking almost 40 years ago. He's talking about how women sucked, and his ideal situation would be to go to Africa and get a naked woman on a zebra, called her Unfufu, and bring her back to the West. Only in a matter of years, because she starts hanging out with other Western women, you can't do this to you. We can't tell you what to do and run you and keep you at home and and all sort of stuff. And she's like, I want half, Eddie. And like the whole auditorium erupts in laughter. And the reason why stand-up comedy is funny is because there's truth in it. And that's why people laugh. And that's why I keep making reference to stand-up comedy. I should legit do an entire series on stand-up comic bits where they break down realities of the world. Okay. The cold hard truth. Anyway, shared values. Oh, my favorite one is abolish no-fault divorce. Now, if you Google what no-fault divorce is, I have it up here on my other screen. The Wikipedia definition is no-fault divorce is the dissolution of a marriage that does not require the showing of wrongdoing by either party. So in the past, fault needed to be presented to the family court system to untie the knot, i.e., she cheated on me. She's banging Kevin from sales. I want out. Then, the courts would look at that petition, entertain it, and then, if reasonable, to untie the knot. Now, that might seem like a good idea. Abolish no-fault divorce. This is what the TradCons, this is what the Daily Wire guys are all saying. This is what Jeremy Boring, was talking about, particularly insidious and evil and all these sorts of things. Let's say you abolish no-fault divorce, and we hop in a time machine and we go back to a time before there was no-fault divorce, and you had to prove fault. You had to prove fault of the other party to untie the knot. Well, golly gee, if I remember correctly, as a kid, there was a lot of people that stayed married because they couldn't untie the knot. They would just bang other people. They would pretend that they're married. They would pretend that they're in love. They would show up at family events and functions and act like everything's okay when you could tell they hated each other, and they would disparage each other. So they would just stay together in misery. Now, that's how some of them acted. The notion that no fault or removing no fault solves that is incredibly, you want to talk about incredibly insidious and evil? Well, we live in an environment today where it's the hashtag Me Too era. And how many great men have been destroyed just from allegations of women saying, you did something to me 10 years ago. And then we've got Russell Brand today. I did a show about it the other week. They've basically either deplatformed him or they've left him on the platform and demonetized him so that he can't earn revenue. He's lost sponsors. I think has dumped him, all based on the accusation without evidence or proof, because we're to believe all women. So, let me think. Women aren't happy. Is it entirely possible, because we have to believe all women today, that they might make up reason for fault? He's financially abusive. He doesn't give me money to buy groceries. He controls, the credit cards. Whatever happens to work today, if they remove no fault, I guarantee you, removing no fault will have almost no impact on the divorce rate. It just won't, because this is the world that we live in today, where it's believe all women, without any evidence. I said the other day, when I was doing the other podcast, I'm surprised at this point that some descendant of Eve who has a claim to it would say that there's a Me Too on Adam, because there's no limitation period. It's not like, if a credit card company needs to sue you for not paying your credit card bill, it has to happen within 2 years. Otherwise, the limitation period is passed and the courts aren't going to entertain it, right? There's no limitation period on things like Me Too or women changing their mind on something or women alleging something without evidence. It's just point the finger, blame, and then they get the remedy that they want. And that's the world that we live in today. So I think the notion of abolishing no fault divorce is going to fix things, that's just dumb. And if anybody believes that, you're just dumb. It ain't going to fix anything. It ain't going to solve anything. Let's keep going. What else did he say? The family court system needs to be torn down and rebuilt. And by the way, I've had a conversation with Andrew Clavin on the Daily Wire before. That video is pinned below in the description. That was a few years ago. It was around the time my book was just released, and he or his people contacted me to come on to talk about marriage and divorce, stuff that I was talking about in my book. And I thought we had a very productive conversation. He was open to hearing things. He pushed back on some things. I'm completely open to talk to any of these Daily Wire people. They want to have a conversation or a debate or whatever it is. I'm happy to do that. I don't think they'll do it though, because it's a no-win situation for them. There's just no way that the argument that they're going to present is going to defeat the problems that exist with it. Manning up isn't going to solve it. Jordan Peterson had the worst take on it ever, man. Just go watch that podcast that I did breaking down his three-part series. So, family court system must be torn down and rebuilt. Really? You're going to tear it down and how? Who exactly is going to tear it down and rebuild it? You and the TradCon crew, you're going to petition to have that changed. How's that going? Where are the bills in Parliament that are going to be entertained? The thing with the family law system today is, sorry, let me just rewind a little bit. So we live in a matriarchy today. We don't live in a patriarchy, we live in a matriarchy. It's a female first primary social order. You've heard this before. Everything in family law that has been passed over the decades, this isn't over the last few years, decades again, everything in there has been passed to protect women and children. Men are disposable. We've always been disposable throughout history. Nobody really gives a shit about men. They keep telling you, they care about you, but they don't. They really just don't care about men. Men have always been disposable. They're always going to be disposable. Women are protected. It's always been that way. That's why when the ship hits a freaking iceberg and the Titanic went down, it's women and children first. And they all got on the life yacht, and all the guys basically drowned, right? That's the way that the system works by default. So you think that you're going to change the laws that are written there to protect women? I mean, the notion of deadbeat dads exists, and that soundbite has existed for decades again, because there were legitimately some douchebag guys that would have children and just walk away from their obligations, and she was left financially destitute. So they created things like child support and alimony to extract money from it and give it to her. The problem with it though is that they went real far with the language and had it so broadly written that it's an advantage to women to be deceptive, to take advantage of it for control and for money. Again, I cover it in the chapter in my book in great lengths and detail. Get the Unplugged Alpha and read it. If you haven't read it, it will make sense to you. Okay. You're not going to tear down and rebuild the family court system anytime in your lifetime, probably definitely in my lifetime either. It's not going to happen. Then he says, the red pill has no solutions today. Sure. The red pill, the manosphere, whatever. He calls it a surrender. Now, I use the term surrender from time to time. Like, for example, you need to surrender to the fact that water is wet and that you can't breathe underwater. Just not. You can't walk into a fucking ocean and keep breathing like you're breathing air when you're underwater. You need to surrender to the fact that water is wet and you will die if you try to breathe it. The sun is hot. If you go out in the bright sunshine and you're a pale skinned white dude in the frickin' desert in Arizona, you'll get a sunburn. You're going to be very badly damaged. You're going to be hurting for days and end up with some issues, with your skin, obviously. So you have to surrender to certain realities that exist in the world. So if you want to call surrendering to the notion that marriage is a bad idea, fine, Matt Walsh or whoever else that wants to use that term. Um, it's an acceptance of the reality. It's what it is. Women aren't what they were decades ago. They weren't what existed in my parents and grandparents and great grandparents' generation. Women have a long laundry list of demands of men. Men don't meet most of that long laundry list of demands that women are expecting. Women are also bringing to the table a lot of baggage, a lot of like notches, a very large notch count. They've shared their body with multiple men. They go on talking about they want to demand monogamy from a man, but if they've shared their body with 20 or 30 other guys and then claim that they've gotten right with God or whatever it is that they want to get right with, and they're now ready to settle down, you can't erase your past choices. You can't erase the fact that you shared your body with 20, 30, 50, 100 other guys. You just can't. If you have a predisposition, if you have evolved yourself to the point where you're used to moving from one guy to the other when things don't work out, when you don't get your way, if things are, like if your cup isn't filled by whatever it is that he needs to do for you, and you're at guy number 51, who cares if number 52 comes along, because you'll find 53 and 4 and 5. They always think there's something bigger and better on the other side when you get to that sort of situation. So accepting that this is a reality of the women that come to the table today, and it's not just that, it's some of the problems, there's lots of other problems. Entitlement, bratty behavior. A lot of them bring children from prior relationships. In my grandparents' age, in my parents' age, there was almost no single mothers. You go back a few hundred years, like even as recent as a few hundred years, if a woman became a single mother, she was at the bottom of the totem pole as far as being entertained for wife stock or for mother stock or for any of those things. They were generally resigned to brothels and stuff like that, right? They're very, very bottom. And it's now, today now they're celebrated. They can bring kids from 2 different fathers, 3 different fathers. It doesn't matter. There's women on dating apps. People send me these screenshots all the time. I got tired of sharing them on social media and Twitter because there's so many of them where women are on dating apps legitimately pregnant with the seed of another man in their belly, holding themselves out to be of value and wife and marriage material. I want to be a stay-at-home mom. I've got a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I'm pregnant right now, and I want to be a stay-at-home mom. Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me? This is what men are dealing with today. But, TradCon say just man up and do it, man, because you're an individual. You're different. Have honest communication. State in principle, no divorce from the outset. Have shared faith. Have shared values. Abolish no-fault divorce. All these sorts of things. I really hope you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to watch the full-length podcast, you can find that over here, that clip's from. If you're newer to the channel, make sure you hit subscribe over here. And pin down below in the top comment, you'll find a bunch of useful links to my website, my supplement line books, and a bunch of other stuff. Have an amazing day. Peace out.